Hello and welcome to this video on the BASTL Instruments PIZZA, an 8HP advanced oscillator come hybrid full synth voice. There's loads to go at, so let's check out what's to come before we get into it. This video is sponsored by BASTL Instruments. Now PIZZA is an oscillator with additional built-in modulating oscillators, wave shaping, wavefolding, ring modulation, lots of clever CV assignments, multiple outputs that are perfect for stacking and blending different types of synthesis. You can really kind of go to town and get really advanced with the module. We'll have an in-depth look at the features in a second, but I will say up front, because that's going to take a while, because it does so much, that if you'd like to skip around, the timing index is on screen and in the description. So let's run down the features of PIZZA. Going top to bottom, we start with this tune control, which here is set to octave. Pressing the tune button, we go to detune, which is for our modulation. If we hold this button, we move to tune mode, and we can tune with semitones, or hit that again and fine tune the whole oscillator. Holding this takes us back to the default mode there. So coming down from the tuning there, we hit the FM section, and we have two inbuilt modulating oscillators, a ratio oscillator to the left and an octave oscillator to the right. As I move this FM index, just come up an octave here in general. And then we have a button for the octave of the octave oscillator from a sub an octave below, the same tuning, an octave above, or two octaves above. The octave oscillator has its own output, which is a sine wave. Going back to FM here, to the left we hit the ratio oscillator. And there's some default ratios here on the module. But these can be set to musical intervals like fourths, fifths, minor thirds, major thirds. As well as the manual control, there's an attenuator and an input for the FM index control. And if you'd like to override the internal phase modulation, the FM modulation, we can plug an external signal in, which will then appear on this side of that control. Moving down from this FM, we hit this shape control section with a CV input and a slider. We have this wave shape control, which isn't doing anything to the main output there, and that's because it wave shapes the modulation, both ratio and octave oscillators. So if I move shape on the octave oscillator out there, you can see we shape to saw waves or pulse waves, and it's a sine wave in the centre. Now this will affect the main output if there's FM involved or ring modulation. So if I apply some FM here, and then start to shape these modulators, You can see in here there that this wave shaping then has an effect on the main output. The next wave shape is a folder, and going left of this, we have a Buchla 259 style wave folder, and a digital based folder, which is based on polynomials. We then have a ring modulator, which will use these two modulators to ring modulate the main output. So octave oscillator here, and of course its octave has a big effect. And to the left, ratio oscillator. We then hit this control, which is assignable. You can see that long holding will hit the assign there, so if we long hold, we can assign this external voltage or the internal one with this knob to control different things in the patch. They can be tuning, ratio settings, octave settings, or say one of these wave shapers, and all of this is in the manual. I'll list some of them on screen. So for example, if I assign the control to control ring modulation, and just hold to come back out of it, and use folding on the shape, I could use shape here to fold my wave, control to ring modulate my wave. And this is just an offset, just a manual control when there's no CV present. So I can be FM modulating, folding and ring modulating at the same time, all under voltage control. There's also a pulse output, and FM index and modulation of FM will control the pulse width. We have our main pitch control input, the volt per octave input, a hard sync, the assignable control CV input, CV over FM index, an external input to override these internal modulation oscillators, and we have the shape control right next to its manual slider. There's over 20 patches in this video going through all these features in more detail with musical and creative examples to bend and push this into all sorts of different synthesis and a wide range of sounds. Skip around with that timing index as you see fit, and let's dive in. So in this patch I wanted to explore combining FM tones and wavefolding with low pass gates for some kind of West Coast Donks. Very Buchla inspired. Now if we come out of the low pass gate and just listen to pizza directly, you can hear there's lots of modulation. Now another West Coast inspired technique here is to use random voltages to shape the tone of your patch. Have 3 random voltages here to shape, which is set to wave, the control input, which if I long hold we can see is set to fold, and to the FM index. If I cancel these out, so bringing in some modulation, as this little arpeggio pattern plays round, we're stepping through different tones per step. Getting this back into a low pass gate. We've got these nice, rich, randomly modulating tones, controlled dynamically by a low pass gate. Add in some long trailing combinations of delays and reverb. So here I'm playing around with using pizza for 3 different layers in the patch: the pulse output, the main output, and the modulating oscillators output. Losing my drums here, and the masses of reverb, which is always good fun. Try using 3 different outputs into different effects, different chains, panning them around, moving them in stereo, and creating these triple layers, be it for ambient generative nature, like this, or something more structured. So in this patch we're going to explore the wave shaping that's for the octave oscillator and the ratio oscillator, and how we can access both wave shapers at the same time. This is currently the octave output there, going into Ikarie for some VCA kind of chopping rhythmically with an envelope, and some random panning. So this is the octave output here, the modulator waveform for the FM. We're going to use it as our main output in this case, our only output from Pizza in this patch, and look at the wave shaping. Simply selecting wave here, this shape will shape towards a saw, as that graphic would suggest. And shape towards a square when we go the other way. I could use one envelope to push the shape towards the saw wave there, and then use another envelope, this one, to negatively push towards the square on other steps in my sequence. So although these voltages are effectively mixing together, you can't square shape on top of saw shaping. It's not like two separate circuits. You can mix your two envelopes together and invert one of them on that control there to play around with both wave shapers at the same time. Sequence back in. And the version that's going through this VCA and panning. So pairing Pizza with Ikarie is a really lovely thing to do, and here I thought I'd filter the pulse output and use the other outputs as modulation. So pulling the modulation entirely just to keep this clear. The main input here is the pulse. I'm then using the main output to modulate the filter's cutoff. And because I can fold and FM modulate this main output, it can get pretty wild. Things get even more fun when we start to modulate the stereo modulation from the modulating oscillator. We can start with that at the same octave as the incoming pulse. If you've got some headphones on, you'll hear some interesting stereo filter movement. Octaves above work really well too. What I really like is using an octave below for this carrier. Make sure you grab some headphones. The way that image just goes and kind of really opens up. It sounds really cool. Put the main output back into filter modulation for normal cutoff control. Let's start to fold that main output controlling the cutoff. Add a bit of FM to it too. God, this sounds good. I've turned Pizza into a drum kit. That's literally all that's happening. Just Pizza's output being recorded, nothing else. Let's kind of go back to the start of the patch. This is just Pizza droning. Chosen a suitably low octave, and this green trace here is an envelope to modulate pitch. I'm doing that through the volt per octave to simulate a kick drum. The next thing that I did was to take some external noise into a VCA, trigger an envelope to open that noise in the VCA on beats 2 and 4, and to patch that into the FM index. And as I'm modulating FM there with the noise, I needed a mixer to mix the noise with another envelope to modulate the FM. So bringing in this envelope, watch the blue trace and listen here. I've then got a really high-pitched noise into Ikarie here, high resonance, very tight little envelope, and as I patch that signal back in, that's going to modulate the fold amount there that's been assigned on that control in. And then finally, I thought, how do I get some interesting pitch changes in this bass line? I've got these nice envelopes to the FM there, giving me a bass line. If I mix my kick envelope in a unity mixer that will retain VOP-Proctiv information or a precision adder, I can mix my kick envelope with some VOP-Proctiv info and get a bassline happening. So in this patch we're going to look at two of my favourite things about modular synths. One, dynamic modulation, and two, layering complementary sounds to build bigger, more interesting sonic landscapes and musical patterns. Now let's start with this idea of dynamic modulation. All I'm doing here is modulating pizza with an envelope on the FM input there, on the FM index. There's nothing else happening downstream, so that's just pizza straight through into my mixer here. But this envelope I'm using to modulate the FM has this sequence modulating the level of the envelope and the decay time of the envelope. So check out that blue trace, that's what's modulating FM. We've got short little percussive bursts, longer FM bursts, this idea of long and short notes, push and pull, different levels of modulation. It's very dynamic. Now the second part of the patch is the pulse output into this filter. I'm using a different rhythmic pattern to start with and a different envelope, this right hand one here. Nice, interesting, dynamic modulation, and when I layer this nice kind of fat subtractive East Coast style patch with the FM straight out of pizza, it's the same sequence, but there's lots of interesting layering and interesting rhythmic interplay between these two modules. So this is pizza dry, just recording the output directly there from the main oscillator, simply seeing how does it sound when I modulate all this shaping, modulation and tonal generation at the same time. Have 3 LFOs, which you can see dance around on those pink, yellow and green traces, modulating the shape there. I've assigned the control to ring modulation, and I'm modulating the FM index too, and these are just unsynced, free-running LFOs. And there's just these really lovely, smooth tonal shifts. And there's our big dystopian drone. From a modulated pizza, modulated filtering, stereo movement and some effects. So let's explore the wave folder on pizza. And the folder is an option here on this shape control. It's a dual wave folder that will fold with a Buchla 259 style folder as we come to the left of this control. Go up an octave and come back down there. And then we have an original digital style folder based on polynomials to the right. Sounds like a much cleaner harmonic series sweep. Now that's applied to the main output there, and you can assign a control to it on that controlling as well as select it for shaping simply by holding and clicking through to select what we'd like, in this case fold. And the reason for me doing that is I want to use a looping envelope here to modulate it. But as this envelope is positive only, I want to be able to modulate negatively from center into that Buchla 259 style folding. And then positively into this polynomial original digital folding. Wavefolding gets even more expressive and rich and potentially harsh sounding when we couple that with some FM. So here's this really rich dynamic folding, modulating both wavefolders here through two different inputs and the FM. Now pulling this patch back, this is a volt per octave sequence and we're just listening to the main oscillator. This envelope is coming into control here, which by holding a sign, I've assigned to the folding. I've done that so I can invert and modulate into this Buchla folder. And then the next thing I did was to add some FM, and this will fold after the FM, so a sequence here to FM index. Really takes things up a gear in terms of how rich this wave is. But as we can access fold modulating through shape and through this assigned controller, I thought I'd do some positive modulation into this digital polynomial wavefolding. We can actually access and modulate both folders at once. So adding this envelope to modulate shape here and just turning up its effect. It's just a quarter note pulse there. This really nice combination of the Buchla style folding being enveloped in, this digital polynomial style folder kind of accenting the downbeat in the pattern there, and a little bit of sequenced FM depth. So the pulse output on Pizza has pulse width modulation. Now when you're just listening to the pulse, the FM index here will change the pulse width manually. And any modulation that you apply to the FM index will apply to the pulse width. So if I add an LFO, that's the blue trace there on data. I'll just play around with the octave and the rate of modulation for a second. Now for anyone that's watched the channel for a while, you know that I really like audio rate PWM. So I'm going to change my modulation here to be from an oscillator. And we can find some really interesting audio rate overtones. I mean, that through a filter would make for a really killer bass sound. But instead of using an external oscillator, we could use a spare output. In this case, I'll use the octave oscillator and patch that straight into the FM index. And right away, from a standard pulse, you can see we get some interesting pulse width shifts. So just through modulation of PWM, got this really nice cool kind of distortion-like sound, and there's no distortion in the patch. Volt per octave sequence into Pizza, and the modulation of PWM. It's a very simple sequence, however it's audio rate and sub-audio rate modulations mixed together, which we'll go through, and those being dynamic. So I'm using a mixer external to the FM input here, which is controlling that pulse width. You can hear this yellow trace, it's just an LFO, very standard practice for pulse width modulation. Mixing with that is the octave oscillator output, which is this blue trace here, going through an external VCA with an envelope controlling its level. It's this envelope right here. So as I turn that up, see certain notes in this sequence envelope in bits of this octave oscillator as audio rate modulation. Now mixing that dynamic modulation with the LFO, gives us this great sound straight out of Pizza. So here I'm using the octave oscillator as a sub, It's really reinforcing this patch, giving us this nice kind of sucky wave shaping that's also affecting our FM. Now muting all of the drums and the sub. This is the main output here, modulated by a dynamic envelope. And by dynamic, I mean the level and the decay time of this envelope is changing, so modulated modulation, before we hit that FM index, and that's working really well. The main output is sidechained externally in my mixer and VCA here, and so is this sub. Now the sub's a nice clean sine wave there, but this envelope is ramping up that shaping, pushing it towards that saw wave shaping there. Playing just the main line again, you can hear that little zippy sound within the FM, and that's because the oscillators have their shape modulated before they modulate the FM. Coupling that in with the sub gives this nice kind of suck of energy towards the end of the bar. So nice thick clean sub, extra harmonics and interest from modulating the shape of the sub also affects my FM. Changing the octave there, bringing that sub up. So here I'm looking at another control assigned destination, and it's the octave of the octave oscillator here. And this control input is modulating which octave that's in. And this control assign is bouncing around these octaves. If I remove my modulation, hold assign, and I've simply hit octave there to assign this control to modulate the octave. So again, bringing this pattern in, it's this green trace here just stepping up as this pattern repeats. A little bit of added envelope to that FM. Arpeggio back into Vop octave. So you can really alter your FM tones by assigning the control input and the CV for that to your octaves. You can assign it to things like ratio oscillator as well. So here we'll explore these organ-like overtones and the ring modulation. Have an envelope going to control, which if we long press we can see where that's assigned, and it's assigned to the ring there. And I'm coming across negatively, attenuverting, inverting this envelope modulation so that we're modulating with the ratio oscillator. So here's the main output here, just a sine wave, and the control knob can be used as just a manual control for whatever we assign it to. In this case the ring mod, or it's an attenuverter for the incoming CV. So as I blend round to this ratio oscillator for the ring modulation, there's these lovely clean organ-like tones. The octave oscillator here. So this is now an LFO to shape and an envelope to the control assigned to ring mod for the octave oscillator. Let's add a sequence back in. So while testing Pizza, I was playing around with some risers and sound effects. Here's the results of that, drenched in reverb. Let's do this nice and slowly. You're going to hear the pitch change, but also all the other parameters modulating as well. It's these voltages and this macro controller that's handling everything here. It's just Pizza into reverb. So with all the cool stuff that we're doing in this video with Pizza, I started to wonder if it would make for a good LFO. So here it is modulating a filter. And as I turn up the main output here, the blue trace to modulate filter cutoff, and some nice audio rate effects. And as we bring these octaves down, we can get into modulation ranges. Now the green trace here on data is an offset voltage. If I bring that back to 0 volts and patch that in at 2 volt per octave here, and as I bring this voltage down, you'll see that green trace drop and the pitch will come even lower into sub-audio ranges. So we can absolutely make pizza a nice slow moving LFO. Now straight away I thought, let's wavefold these LFOs. So shape to fold. We're starting to get some interesting shaping, more unique modulation sources. So rather than just talk about how potentially awesome pizza can be as an LFO with a basic example, if I'd make a whole patch. All the modulation, and you're seeing the three modulation sources, the pulse, the main output, and the sub-octave output here, are on screen on data. They're going up to a mult, and they're modulating my oscillator, that's going into a filter, that's going into beads. There's no other modulation but pizza. My pitch for this oscillator is just coming from an external keyboard. Got some wavefolding and some FM there. No modulation of pizza, it's just static. And you can hear it can be pretty wild when you just let pizza with a negative voltage be offset down into being an LFO and then modulate a whole patch. So this is pizza, dark matter pizza. Come up with some clever name for it and leave it in the comments. Pizza through dark matter, and it's brutal. This is just the reverb, let's kill that in the mixer. And here's the direct out from dark matter. The main output is coming in, the octave oscillator is modulating it. I've got lots of other LFOs modulating feedback, distortion, bass and treble. And it's that feedback that's giving us that kind of sounds like a clanger there. And there's not a lot to do in terms of pizza for this demo of pizza, but it's such a great combo for just brutal droning tones. I start to fold and change the FM. And just get really brutal. Bring the reverb back in. It's just massive. It's such a lovely combo for those into distortion, heavy tones and drones. So here we'll take a look at external modulation of the FM. If I remove the modulation, you'll notice that the sequence has disappeared. And that's one of my favourite reasons for using external FM. Both the octave oscillator and the ratio oscillator offer a lot within pizza itself, but if we modulate with an external modulator, we can actually sequence that separately to pizza and the oscillators that are built into it. If I add my external modulator back in, sweep the frequency so we can hear this external modulation. We can find some really nice musical tones. We could, if we wanted to keep these really locked in, say take the pulse out from pizza and sync our modulator. Now adding in my volt per octave again to the modulator, not to pizza. We can bring in this externally sequenced modulation now, and then bend back across to the static tones of our ratio oscillator. Adding in a sequence to pizza itself, the pizza pitch tracking ratio osc. But then my much faster sequenced modulating oscillator on this side. We've still got the folding, the ring modulating, and let's use that pulse out to sync it all back up again. So I was exploring sync tones and found this really quite harsh tone. This is an oscillator into sync here, not being sequenced. Pizza has been sequenced. Quite a lot of manual FM, and I'm just modulating the filter, processing that main output. And then sync from this oscillator. Just super nasty. Let's get the syncing oscillator tracking. Still all these really interesting bits of dissonance pushing through. So as well as all the interesting digital phase modulation, Yamaha DX style FM that Pizza's doing, we can also do standard, more traditional linear and exponential FM, much more like an analog oscillator. Now here it is into a low pass gate and some delays, but here's the tone straight out of Pizza. Now to get to this modulation, it's an assignable destination for this control and CV input. So holding this to hit a sign, and we go through for the tune LED being lit up. This is linear FM in this case, as the manual states. And if we press to say get octave and detune, we can do exponential FM. I'm going to stick with tune being lit up, so I'm assigning this to linear FM. Here's my basic sine wave out of Pizza, and I'm going to modulate the linear FM. Now I could say sequence Pizza and leave this static. Could do that the other way around, where Pizza is static and I sequence this oscillator. Or sequence both. And play around with some more traditional FM style tones. Into a low pass gate here, and some effects. So do check out that manual and all that you can assign this control input to. That linear FM's a really nice different tone to the other modulation on board Pizza. So if you've got this far in the video, leave a comment with your favourite Pizza topping down below. If you're a Patreon supporter, there's a bonus extended version of my Pizza drum kit patch that's available right now, and that's there on Patreon for you if you'd like to check it out. You'll gain access to my amazing community and other exclusives on the platform. Leave a comment, like, subscribe, all the usual stuff. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.